Hey, what's going on? Jeff Ratcliffe here. The Chargers have one of the most potent offenses in the NFL, but questions loom in Los Angeles. So let's preview for 2019 fantasy football, the Los Angeles Chargers. Let's start with the question because, hey, no news is often good news in July for the NFL, and we got news about Melvin Gordon that was not particularly good. There is the possibility that he holds out into the season. He's planning a camp holdout. This holdout could go into the season. At this point last year, I would have said, hey, there's no way a player holds out for the entire season or anything like that. Well, yeah, I would have been wrong because Le'Veon Bell did so. The precedent has been set. And I'm not saying this is exactly the same situation as Le'Veon Bell, but these are, he was 26 years old last year. Melvin Gordon is 26 years old this year, trying to get that contract in place. It is within the realm of possibility that Gordon holds out that long, or he holds out several games into the season. There's a lot of different potential outcomes on the table. So if we get to fantasy draft season, and we're late August or early September, and we still don't have a resolution of the Gordon situation, we are going to have to approach this very carefully. Immediately, I moved him back in my running back rankings all the way down to 10. So he's now, he would have been clearly the fifth guy off the board. Now he's down at 10, just baking in some of this uncertainty as we head into training camp. But it is a very risky situation. This also bumps up the value of Austin Eckler. Now, we did see Gordon missed 4 games last year. In 3 of those 4 games, Eckler was on the field, and he was the lead back. The other game, he missed that game, and Justin Jackson was essentially the only guy. But in the, down the stretch in weeks 13 and 14, what we saw is Eckler was catching almost all of the passes. Jackson wasn't doing anything as a receiver. And then the carries were actually split about 65-35, in terms of percentage between Eckler and Jackson. So Eckler was clearly the lead back. He's a premium handcuff. If you're drafting with uncertainty about Melvin Gordon's situation, you have to be viewing Eckler as a very interesting player. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if you drafted Gordon, you're the guy who has to draft Eckler. If you didn't draft Gordon, you could do the old naked handcuff play. And the naked hey, don't let your imagination run away with you. The naked handcuff play is pretty simple. You grab a handcuff of a running back who you didn't draft. So you have the handcuff, you don't have the starter. You could easily do that with Austin Eckler. There were a lot of folks who did that with James Conner last year, and we saw how that worked out. So Eckler is in play. Doesn't matter if you didn't draft Gordon. Eckler's in play, and I would say you're probably going to be looking at him in the 6th or 7th round if there's still uncertainty about Gordon. If we know what's going on with Gordon, then Eckler's going to bump down. He'll probably be more like a 9th round pick because he still adds value in the passing game as he showed last year. Now, also, though, if there's uncertainty with Gordon, what we also need to do is in the late rounds possibly grab Jackson. Because the interesting thing, as I mentioned, in Week 15, Gordon wasn't on the field, neither was Eckler. Jackson was a bell cow that week for the Chargers. So while I do think that Eckler is the clear handcuff, if something happened to Eckler, then all of a sudden Jackson becomes interesting. So it's almost a secondary handcuff situation, which is super rare in fantasy football, but it is worth doing just given the overall uncertainty of Melvin Gordon. Now, again, we could get to draft season and Melvin Gordon could have a contract or he could be traded by that point, and it'll all be a moot point. And by the way, if he's traded, now all of a sudden Austin Eckler becomes much more interesting. Austin Eckler becomes a potential 4th or even as high as a 3rd round pick in fantasy football. So a lot of moving parts here. We'll keep our eye to it. Of course, you can keep checking out PFF.com for updates on this situation. But let's move to the quarterback, the old man himself, Phillip Rivers. Seems like every year he's putting up 4,000 plus passing yards, 30 plus passing touchdowns. While his ceiling is not elite for fantasy purposes, his floor is pretty darn high. There are a few quarterbacks out there who have a higher fantasy floor than Rivers. He is a safe option. Now, safe options don't win you fantasy championships, but they also don't lose you weeks. So what I like to do with Rivers, if I'm going to draft Rivers, I'm also going to shoot for the moon with my other quarterbacks. So I'm going to draft Lamar Jackson, or I'm going to draft Jimmy Garoppolo, or Mitchell Trubisky, or one of these upside quarterbacks, because I want that high ceiling, but I also want the safety in case I miss on that guy. So keep that in mind with Rivers. Certainly in play as a top 15 quarterback yet again, but I wouldn't go much higher than maybe 10 on him. He's right in that range of his ceiling and floor. Of course, he does have nice weapons to throw to. We have Keenan Allen, who has 199 catches over the last 2 seasons. Remember when he was injury prone? Well, he hasn't been over the last 2 years. He's been really good, but it's also that ceiling floor with Allen where he has a very nice fantasy floor in PPR, but his ceiling isn't particularly high. So while he is a wide receiver 1, I would look at him as more of a back-end wide receiver 1. He only has, 6 touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. When you're not getting close to double-digit touchdown production at the wide receiver position, it's really hard to crack elite territory. You would have to have some crazy volume to do so. And while his volume is pretty heavy, it's not what I would say crazy. I'm talking like 125 catches, something like that, which we haven't seen out of Allen just yet. But still, rock solid back-end wide receiver 1. Of course, gotta love Mike Williams as a breakout guy. Last year, he kind of quasi-broke out, but not for fantasy purposes because his fantasy numbers really didn't match that double-digit touchdown production that he put up on the board. And the thing that I love about Mike Williams, okay, Tyrell Williams is out of the mix, but Mike Williams is the red zone guy. Last year, he had 11 end zone targets. And when he was in the end zone, targeted 11 times. Keenan Allen had 8. Now, that doesn't sound like a big difference between the two, but consider this. Williams had half the amount of targets as Keenan Allen. That's a huge difference between the two, and it bodes extremely well for Mike Williams to break out in a big way this year. So love him as a breakout target. Targeting him as a wide receiver 3, but his ceiling is a lot higher. Of course, we have a breakout tight end potential here in Los Angeles with the Chargers as well. Hunter Henry. Last year it was supposed to be easy. We were going to get Hunter Henry in like the 6th round of fantasy drafts, and he was going to break out. But of course, the offseason injury, that ruined all of those plans for fantasy purposes. But he's back. He's good to go. And, he is the guy now. Antonio Gates not looking over his shoulder any longer. And we know that this offense likes to use the tight end. So Hunter Henry, you're going to have the big 3 come off the board of Kelsey, Ertz, and Kittle in the first 2 rounds of your draft, very likely. The next guy to come off the board could very well be Hunter Henry. Now, I think that's probably more like a 5th-round pick, but he could very well be the 4th tight end drafted, and I have to tell you, I don't argue against that whatsoever. Love me some Hunter Henry this year. You want to see where Hunter Henry and the rest of the Chargers land in our fantasy rankings? You can check those out at PFF.com.